Good evening, everybody. For those of you watching with us on Zoom tonight and those over on social media as well, thanks so much for joining us tonight for our local election briefing as the GMB Middle and East Coast. The theme tonight is all about trade unions and why these local elections in May matter. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Finbar. I'm the GMB's political officer in the Midlands and East Coast region. And it's apt that we're meeting today on the day that our NHS workers should have been receiving their pay rise rather than the real terms pay cut that this government has offered. But tonight is all about hearing voices from across the GMB and across our movement as well about why May's election matters. And we've got a brilliant packed lineup of speakers tonight from across our union and across our movement. And we all know that the outcome of elections matter to trade unionists and that it's vital that the voices of trade union members are heard by politicians. But I think we've all seen and we can all agree that the sad truth is that even after the year that was, the pandemic and the crisis, and the way that GMB members have been on the front line of guiding this country through the COVID-19 crisis, working people's voices aren't being heard by this government. And we think enough is enough. And before we hear from our speakers, there are just three quick asks that I'm going to make of this meeting that we want you to take away to your branch and to your workplace on the behalf of the GMB. And the first is dead simple. It's sign up for a postal vote for the May elections. Get your colleagues to do the same and your family and your friends. Whether you're working from home or you're working on the front line or juggling family commitments, by signing up to a postal vote, it means that your voice as a trade union member is heard in May. And it's really simple to do now. It's simpler than ever. And the deadline is Tuesday, the 20th of April. I'm going to stick something in the chat box at the bottom, and I'll also email everybody that's attended a link that we've set up with the Labour Party to make that easier than ever. The second is to join a campaign session for these elections. You know, the voices of trade union members are heard even louder when we actually get out and campaign for trade union candidates. And we're going to be hosting a trade union phone bank. So this is an opportunity for trade union members to pick up the phones from the comfort of their own home and call for trade union council candidates in May. It's really easy, it's really straightforward, and the whole idea of this session that we're running in April is it's a taster session to get you used to the system, get you used to doing campaigning for candidates in elections. And again, I'll stick an invite to that into the chat box as well. And the third ask at the back of this meeting is really simple. It's help us build the GMB, because we know we're strongest when we work together, and that is as true in politics as it is in the workplace. So sign up a colleague, sign up a family member or a friend this week and help us build our union. So on that note, without any further ado, I'm going to bring in speakers one by one. We're going to hear their contributions about our subject tonight, and then we should have some time at the end to wrap up with some questions. So first of all, we've got Chantel. Chantel Lee is a member of the GMB and a Labour Party activist in Nottingham. She's also the National Equalities Officer for the Co-op Party, which is Labour's sister party in the cooperative movement. So I'll hand over to you, Chantel.
Thank you, Finbar, and hello to everybody out there. I'll start with an apology because my daughter is in the room above me and decided that now was the most opportune time to start singing and dancing. So hopefully you can all hear me loud and clear. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the importance of trade union members within local government and how each and every one of you can contribute to that in some way. So I'm sure we all know how hard local governments have been hit throughout the last 10 years of austerity, and there is so much more that we need to do and so few resources left to do it with. When the cuts happen, often the first line of defence and the first area to bear the brunt of those cuts is our workers, and city council workers are finding themselves at risk of redundancy or having to do much more work with a reduced set of colleagues. So the capacity is going down, but the workload is either remaining the same or going up. And things like that really matter to us as trade unionists, because we want our workers to feel secure in their labour, but also to know that they can do a good job, that they have the resources and the colleagues to enable them to do so. So it's really important that us as trade unionists consider seeking election, because that's where we can really make the difference. If we're in those council chambers, if we're in the place where those decisions happen. And by using our voices and our collective power, we really can make that change. So I am a local city councillor here in Nottingham, and I never ever considered that it was something that I would be. So when I left school, I was a care worker, and the first thing I did when I got my job was to join the trade union. I didn't see myself as a trade unionist, but it was just what my mum said I should do. When I got a job, I had to join the union, so I did. And through that, that's where my sort of political education began. And I then joined the Labour Party after that. And actually, I joined because I was coming to the end of being a student, and I had like a couple of months left to join while it was still £1. So that's where my priorities were at the time. But that was what led to me joining the Labour Party. But it wasn't with the idea to someday become a local councillor. So when I became a councillor, I was in my 20s, and well, I still am. I'm hanging on by a thread. I've got a little bit left, but I was a young single mum from a council estate, someone who had been a care worker, someone of a mixed heritage background. So probably not who people would picture when they think of a local councillor, or someone who stands up in the chamber and represents them. But I am a councillor, and to any of you out there who feel that you may have additional barriers for whatever reason that may stop you becoming a councillor, that isn't the case. I'm a strong believer in that you cannot be what you cannot see. So people cannot aspire to something if they haven't seen it done before. And us as trade unionists have spent a whole lifetime of breaking down barriers and pushing the envelope and being in those spaces where perhaps we don't always feel most welcome, or we don't always feel like we fit in. But slowly but surely, we can make those changes, and we can feel comfortable in those spaces. And we do that together as a movement. Within the GMB, we've got a fantastic political officer in Finbar, but there are also training courses and support that is out there. So I would really want to say to you, whilst the opportunity for this elections have perhaps passed, there are always by-elections and opportunities. And whilst you may not think of yourself as someone who could be a councillor or who could stand for public office, I would say, please put yourself forward. Don't feel like those barriers will always be there. It isn't the easiest thing in the world to have constant evening meetings and to have lots of papers to read, especially as someone with a 4-year-old on my own in lockdown for the past year. But if I can do it, I promise you, anybody can. So we've got a fantastic line of speakers who I'm sure will really inspire you. And if it is something that you are considering after tonight, do get in touch with Finbar, because he can point you in the right direction. I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks so much, Chantal. As Chantal said, standing for local government is a key role of trade unionists, and it's I'm sure we'll hear more from those in the room that have represented the Labour Party at various different levels as trade unionists over the years. We're going to pass over now to Paul. Paul is GMB British Gas Senior Rep and has been on the front line of the industrial action against fire and rehire tactics at the company. GMB members at British Gas will strike again for their 43rd day, if I'm not wrong, on Wednesday, the 14th of April, which is the date that they face mass sackings by Chris O'Shea and the top brass at British Gas if they don't accept imposed pay cuts of 15%, as well as other changes. So I'm going to hand over to Paul, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, hi. I've worked for British Gas for 39 years nearly now. And currently we're in the longest dispute British Gas has ever seen. As Finbar says, on Wednesday the 14th, we will be entering the 43rd day of our strike action against the company. The strike action's been taken against the imposed terms and condition changes to the company that we've had placed upon us and been forced into either accepting or being fired. It's as simple as that. You can either accept these terms and conditions changes, or you can leave the company with no redundancy and no compensation at all. So we fought long and hard right from the start. The GMB have been great in supporting us. One of the ways that we have been supported is at the very start of this, we contacted all our local MPs. We were assisted by the GMB in doing so. We've got members up and down the country. There was only 4 local MPs that were not contacted by one of their members or many of their members during that period. And we had over 160 responses in that. The political pressure that's been brought about from that has seen Chris O'Shea sitting in front of a select committee not too long ago, back in February, and being questioned on his actions and the way in which he's conducted himself through this period. It was very quickly raised to him and put to him that in 10 years, there'd only been 1 industrial dispute for 1 day in a local area. Since Chris O'Shea took charge, only 4 months before he pulled the trigger on fire and rehire as a tactic of negotiation to force through terms and conditions changes. So it goes to show how quickly this person has come in and completely tore up over 125 years worth of GMB negotiated terms and conditions for our members. These changes will mean an engineer will have to work an additional 156 hours a year, that's a working month at least, to receive the same remuneration as before. We were going to take a pay freeze for 3 years, and we accepted that. Many of this is not necessarily about the money. There is a reduction in our overtime. There is reductions in many of the things that we are paid for the stuff that we do out of hours. We are key workers. We have been working right the way through the start of this pandemic right to today. And we've been attending people's properties and making sure they have heating and hot water. We go into properties with COVID. So we deal with it as much as we can as well. So our engineers have been out there putting themselves and their families at risk. And the thanks that they got was the senior leadership team at British Gas plotting this terms and conditions change and finding their way to impose their new terms and conditions on all the engineers in our area. It's been a really tough year for many people, including the engineers at British Gas, but we have took 43 days very soon of strike action. We're an extremely high percentage unionisation industry. We were the founders of the GMB many, many moons ago. And we're still there fighting today to keep the terms and conditions in some sort of organisation for our service engineers. Thank you.
Good. Good.
Thank you, Paul. I've been round a lot of your picket lines myself over the last couple of months, and it's just inspiring to see your members, how well organised they are, but how enthusiastic they are about this fight. You know, I think it was you that said this to me yourself, Paul, that it starts at British Gas, but fire and rehire is going to become the norm across the labour market. We're going to see it in workplaces closer to home before too long as well.
Very much so. I know that other industries are already looking at it and seeing what the outcome is in British Gas, and then very quickly you'll see this rolling out across the country, affecting far more members all across the country.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Well, I'm going to hand over to Terry Renshaw now. Terry's joining us tonight from the Shrewsbury 24 campaign, which I'm sure needs no introduction from me. Terry was one of the 24 trade unionists arrested and charged with over 200 bogus offences after the ending of a bitter strike in the 1970s. The campaign recently won the landmark victory of having the charges overturned, which is a major victory for all trade unionists, which is why we're so delighted that you've joined us tonight, Terry. It's also worth noting that Terry was also a Labour councillor for 33 years in his native North Wales. So I'll pass over to you on that note, if that's okay, Terry.
Okay, thank you very much, Finbar. If I just step back a bit, I left school in April 1963. The first thing I did on my first day at work was seek out the steward in the workplace I was in to join a union, because I believe passionately in being a member of an organisation. Whatever that organisation is, everybody should be a member of some organisation to represent them in that workplace. And that was the very first thing I did. I joined the old Transport and General, as it was, T&G, in 1963. And I've never, ever been out of a union from that day that I joined in that 1963 year. Never, I've been out of work, but never been out of a union. I went to my first union conference at the age of 17 at the Queen's Hotel in Chester. That's how much I believed in it. I was there active. I became chairman of my local branch of the ASP&D at the age of 20. I've always been active. In 1972, we went on strike. It was the first ever national building workers dispute. And that dispute was something that I was pleased to be involved in. We went out picketing. Out of the 12 weeks that we were on strike, the government of the day picked on one day. And I say deliberately, Finbar, the government of the day picked on one day. And that was September the 6th, 1972. And on that one day, we went to 9 different sites, but they picked on one site. And that one site just happened to be purely coincidental. It happened to be a Robert McAlpine site, the man who set up the blacklisting. We were charged 5 months after the event with trumped up charges. February the 14th, to be exact, Valentine's Day, they come out to give us the charge, the arresters and charges. The strikes, the trial started in October 1973 and carried on through into February 1974. At the end of the trials, 6 people had been sent to jail. The worst one being the jailing of Des Warren. Des Warren was given 3 years. And while he was in jail, he was injected and given drinks with what we call the chemical kosh. And he died very prematurely in 2004, Des did, of drug-induced Parkinson's disease, something which the prison service had done to him. We kept fighting to get our names cleared because we felt it was an unjust decision. We felt the whole thing was political at the time. We continued with that argument that it was political. In 2006, we set up the campaign in earnest. It had been going on before, but in earnest, we set it up in 2006. Group of trade unionists from within the Northwest and North Wales, we came together and we decided now's the time to put this fight on the road. And we campaigned for justice for the 24. That's all we wanted, justice for the 24 building workers. That campaign went on. Our researcher, and I'll give this a tip to everybody now, everyone should have an Eileen Turnbull in their armory. Everyone. Because Eileen Turnbull, she's the woman that rooted out all the information that we put forward as fresh evidence. Eileen was the one that found it. An ex-legal officer from the GMB. So the GMB train them well, don't they? But she found that information and we put the fresh information to the CCRC in April 2012. They looked at it, they kept looking at it, and they looked at it more. In 2017, they rejected us. They said the evidence wasn't good enough to go back to the Court of Appeal. Our legal team, Bindmans in London, they suggested to us as pickets that the decision of the CCRC was flawed in law and that we should go for a judicial review. That was their advice to us. We met as pickets at St. David's Park in Ewlow in North Wales with the campaign team to discuss it. Everybody left the room and left the pickets alone to make that decision. So we had the pickets in the room discussing it. And at that stage, 2 pickets withdrew from the campaign. They said it wasn't going anywhere, it wasn't going to win, and they were giving up. Those two pickets were Ricky Tomlinson and Arthur Murray. They withdrew from the campaign. If the rest of us had withdrawn from the campaign at that stage, that would have been the end of it in 2017, no victory. Credit to the other 8, we agreed to go forward for a judicial review. And we went for that judicial review to the law court in Birmingham. We had a permission stage hearing, first of all, with a man called Justice Jay. He listened to the campaign, he listened to our barrister, and he listened to the arguments. The CCRC didn't even bother turning up because they were confident they were going to win. But our barrister, Danny Friedman, put that case forward with full vigour. And at the end of the day, Justice Jay said this case warrants going forward for a full judicial hearing. And he said, I'll set aside, there shall be 2 days for this to be heard, and you will get a date in the early spring. In April 2019, we had our judicial review in Birmingham. And it was at that stage that the CCRC, having listened to Danny Friedman for 2.5 hours, stood up and withdrew their case. That was fantastic. They withdrew their case because it didn't hold water. It didn't have merit. But they asked for the case to be returned back to them for them to reconsider their verdict. And Lord Justice, I'll give him his full title, Lord Justice Flo said, I will give it back to you with conditions. A new commissioner looks at it and a new case officer looks at it. And this time, I want you to come back with the proper decision. He was telling them what the decision was. It still took the CCRC another 10 months till March 2020 to come back and say, we've referred it back to the Court of Appeal because we feel it needs hearing again. It took them that long to do that. As everybody knows now, the Court of Appeal sat on the 3rd and the 4th of February in London in the Royal Court of Justice. I went down there. John Mackenzie Jones, we were the only 2 pickets that turned up for that appeal. The only 2. John Mackenzie Jones and myself. Our campaign team turned up. Harry Chadwick, Eileen Turnbull, Mark Turnbull, they turned up. And we sat there for those 2 days and we listened to that evidence going back and to again. And Danny Friedman, again, he was on the first day, on the 3rd of February, all day, Danny Friedman was on his feet, giving that case of how the case was unjust and it should be overturned all day. And most of the second day, it was Danny Friedman that did all that case. The judges then said that they were retiring to consider their decision and it would be deferred for 2 to 4 weeks. Well, it took them nearly 7 weeks. And I think they had a problem. The problem was, how do we say, well, we've overturned it without discrediting the original court? That was their problem. But we all know now, 23rd of March this year was a victory. It was that victory. It was that victory, not for 24 building workers. It was a victory for the whole of the trade union movement. And I do get emotional on this. The whole of the trade union movement. We could not have gone on without the support that came from the family that we were all part of. And that family I see as the trade union movement, that wider family of solidarity, of unity. And that's something else we need. We need within the unions, we need that solidarity, we need that unity. And I urge everybody to be a part of something. But without that support, without that help, without the phone calls from different people, and GMB were fantastic, PCS were fantastic, Unite, all the unions, they were fantastic. The trades councils, the trades union branches, the Labour Party branches. I've forgotten how many CLPs I went to speak at. They were all fantastic. The Labour Party put it in this manifesto 3 times, that on return of a Labour government, they would release all papers in relation to historical cases, including the Shrewsbury campaign. That's what they put it on no less than three times in their manifesto. But the 23rd of March, we got that decision. You've won. I'll tell you now, I broke down. I cried. 47 years of campaigning, 47 years of claiming I was innocent, not able to get a travel visa to travel America because I had a criminal record, not able to stand for the Police and Crime Commissioner's role when that came out, because the Labour Party said they couldn't put me forward. I know why they couldn't put me forward, because I had a criminal record. Things like that held you up in your life. The first time I stood for council in 1981, I was knocking on doors in the Holywell area in North Wales, and people would answer the door and say, "You're one of them Shrewsbury pickets, aren't you?" And I would say, "Yes, I am." I wasn't shying away from it, because we did nothing wrong. But we've been cleared now. But we've been cleared because we stuck together and we fought as a campaign in unity with the same goal to be aimed for. And that goal was to clear the names of the 24 pickets, but also to make sure that the government of the day, whichever that government is, do not pick on trade union members and trade union organisations, because that's what we need. Coming back to local elections, we've got the Welsh Assembly coming up in Wales. We need to fight that. We need to win it, because I can't think of anything worse than having Tories sat in Westminster and sat in Wales as well. I can't think of anything worse than that. We've got to campaign for that. We've got to campaign for a Labour government. But when I say Labour, I also use the word socialist. On my Labour Party card, it says the Labour Party is a democratic socialist organisation. And we mustn't forget that word socialism, because socialism is what my life is about. Socialism is everything to me, and it should be everything to everybody else that wants to be friends with me, because that's the only way forward. We've got to look after each other. If we don't look after the person on the bottom, the person at the top's not going to be looked after. We've got to look after everybody from the root up. And that's what it's all about. And we must get out in the local elections. I urge all trade union members, if you haven't thought about it, join your Labour Party, stand for election, have your voice, because you can't stand in the wilderness and shout, nobody will hear you. What you can do, you can stand in the council chamber and shout, where you will be heard. And I urge all trade union members, that's what you need to do. You need to be a part of an organisation. You need to be in there fighting. And without that fight of ours, without that solidarity, we would not be shouting now, "We won, we won." Thank you very much.
Terry, thank you very much. That was really inspiring, and really, goes to show the power of solidarity, the power of trade union organisation when we work together and hold the course. So thank you very much. I'm sure a lot of us watching, we're really, really inspired by that. So thank you for joining us and for making that contribution.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Nicole. Nicole needs no introduction, really. She's a very well-known figure in the Labour movement in our region. She's a trade union and Labour Party campaigner in Nottinghamshire with the GMB. She sits on Labour's regional exec in the East Midlands as well. So I'll hand over to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Finbar. So I guess where I'm going to start today is there are a number of reasons why we need a Labour government, Labour councillors, and people who share Labour values in positions of power and influence in our communities. If I went through all the frustrations in the world that we live in today, I would be here all night, so I won't. But today we're talking about rebuilding better, and the emphasis for me is on the word better. The biggest question is, how do we rebuild with a government that's constantly hell-bent on taking us backwards, giving with one hand and taking with another? How do we rebuild better with people in power who don't see the struggles we see, or hear our cries and do very little or nothing about them? How do we find the strength to rebuild with people who are tired and disappointed? Some people have lost loved ones throughout this pandemic. Some are unemployed, whilst others are living in unbearable environments or have nowhere to live at all. The reality is there are still so many that face discrimination in the workplace and in our society as a whole. So you can imagine how I felt reading this week in the government's current race report that states institutional racism doesn't exist in Britain. You can just imagine how that went down, for me this week. Where do we even begin to rebuild for the better in an environment like that? I kept thinking, who was in that room? What happened to all the data, cases, experiences of so many ethnic minorities? Where did they put all the evidence that shows us that institutional racism does exist? Do our voices not matter? How do we move forward with people who don't care to change the fact that in some cases, we are paid less than our white counterparts? Some studies show that making your name more English makes us more likely to get an interview for a job. Data shows that ethnic minorities are more likely to be in high-risk jobs during the pandemic and are more likely to die from COVID. We are more likely to be stopped and searched, arrested, and more likely to go to prison. I, as a Black woman, am 4 times more likely to die during childbirth, but the government says institutional racism doesn't exist. So I'll tell you what the GMB stands for and why we as campaigners cannot take our foot off the gas. Women workers are still lower paid on average than men for doing the same jobs. Ethnic minority workers are less likely to get a promotion than their white counterparts. We cannot allow ourselves to sleep easy or rest when young workers are still most likely to be facing bullying at work, and disabled workers often performance managed out of their jobs or denied reasonable adjustments. LGBT+ workers are still harassed in the workplace and in wider society. We need a government locally and nationally that will not ignore these issues, which is why every time you get the opportunity to vote, vote. And I would obviously urge you to vote Labour, but vote. Truth is, this road to equality is much longer than we all thought it would be, and it's not an easy one. We had to fight then, and we're going to have to continue to fight now. We've come a long way, but we mustn't give up. And I'm encouraged by all the people on the panel today that have encouraged me that we must not give up. Victory will be ours. We need to brace ourselves for what will sometimes be an uphill battle. Now that means we need to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations if we really want to see progress. We need to unite under the common goals we share that seek to see justice, equality, and Britain move forward and genuinely rebuild better. It's not a time for us to be silent, distracted, or consumed by the things that seek to divide us. We all need to be holding various stakeholders, including businesses, institutions, and the government, accountable. I trust that the campaigners, activists, and the Labour Party will hold them accountable every step of the way. Now, contrary to some beliefs, the role of the unions have never been dated, because fighting for workers' rights can never be out of fashion or dated. How can fighting for equality ever be a thing of the past? It will always be on our agenda. It is in this season we have seen what our unions do best, which is what they've always done: fight for the rights of hardworking people. But I believe that together with the Labour Party in power, pushing in the same direction, we can do so much more. If we do nothing, nothing changes. If we genuinely believe that our vote is our voice, then let's use it. So I'm challenging all of us to tell a friend to vote on the 6th of May, because we rebuild better with Labour at the heart of our communities, and we will rebuild faster and go further together. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. That's really inspiring call to arms for all of us listening tonight. So thank you so much for that, for your contribution. I totally agree with your ask there about getting people to ask friends, to ask colleagues, to ask fellow GMB members to get out and use that voice on the 6th of May. So I'll bring in our last speaker. Vernon is very well known to all of us in the East Midlands Labour movement and is a long-standing friend of the GMB, both in terms of his support for our members in their struggles and in their campaigns, but also speaking out for working people during his time in Parliament as well. He's recently become a member of the House of Lords and continues to campaign for Labour values and the rights of working people there. So over to you, Vernon.
Finbar, thanks very much, and thank you very much to everyone who's participating this evening. And it's a great privilege to be with you all. I was reflecting, just as people were speaking there, on the incredible stories of each and every one of the people who've spoken. And I'll say a little bit about each of them individually, but also reflecting on the fact that we've all talked about the importance of campaigning. And we've been moved by what everybody's said here for different reasons. But unless we campaign, people won't hear any of it. People won't hear any of it. Look at what Chantel said about local government and local authorities. Absolutely right. Stripped to the bone, Nottingham City and all the other authorities across our region and indeed across the nation. It's not happened by accident. It's the result of conscious policy decisions made by the government through years of austerity, where councils have had their grants cut and they're unable to provide everything that they want. But Labour authorities have acted as a line of defence against that, acted as in the best interests of the communities. And we have to campaign on that and make people even more aware of it. What Nicole has just said about the report, that was a government-sponsored report saying there's no structural institutional racism. When, as Nicole has just pointed out for us, if you're from a black or ethnic minority background in many areas, whether it be work, whether it be education, whether it be stop and search, you will be discriminated against. Who's going to make that case if we don't? What Paul's just said is an absolute disgrace. What workers of years standing like Paul with British Gas is happening in British Gas, but it's happening in other industries as well, where employers are using the cloak, if you like, of the awful pandemic which we've all suffered from, some more than others, but all suffered from as a country, as families and as individuals, hiring and then rehiring people on worse contracts. And how's that actually being addressed? Individual workers with their union standing up against it and saying, we are not going to tolerate it. We are not going to accept this, and requiring and needing the support of the trade union and wider Labour movement. But who's going to tell people about that if we don't? Who's going to make, Paul, that case should be on the front page of every single newspaper, leading every single news bulletin. It is an attack on ordinary people's working rights. And again, Paul and his colleagues with others are having to fight against it, against the might of a huge multinational institution backed by billions and billions of pounds. And then Terry, what an inspirational message, Terry, from 47 years. 47 years. People listening to this tonight. This should be, and I know it's had publicity, but this should be, every single person should hear about the fact that ordinary people protesting all those years ago during a building dispute had their rights overturned by people being arrested and then imprisoned. In our country, a leading democracy. And it was 47 years later that that wrong rather was put right. And you're an inspiration, Terry, and all of your colleagues and those who stood with you. But it shouldn't have happened, should it? It shouldn't have happened in the first place, and it shouldn't have taken 47 years to put right. But what sorted it? Campaigning. People standing up for what they believed to be right. And every single thing, Finbar, thing that Nicole has said, Chantal has said, that Paul has said, and Terry has said, to the people listening to this and who may hear this message onwards, know that the local elections coming up, whether they be for the Welsh Assembly, the Police and Crime Commissioner in Scotland, or for local authorities like where I am in Nottinghamshire, where we're trying to defeat the Tories in controlling Nottinghamshire, these campaigns matter. These votes matter. Because at the end of the day, they are people standing up and saying, we do not accept it has to be like this. We do not believe that we have to, as a country, be like this. And it has to be like this for our families and our communities. And that has always been, behind me is a bookcase. It's full of the history of the Labour movement and great figures from our past. Each and every one of them motivated by, as Terry was saying, by the Labour and trade union movement to build that better society. But it doesn't just happen. It's never happened. No progress for working people has been achieved simply by being given it. You know, we talked, Nicole mentioned about women's rights. Women didn't get the vote. Ordinary working people didn't get the vote as an act of kindness. Women still haven't got full equality, didn't get it from an act of kindness. It was people democratically, through action, achieving that and campaigning and working for it. And that's what we will have to do in the local elections. And I just want to say a couple of things. Finbar, this is going to be tough. You know, Terry and Paul don't need telling about it being tough. But I tell you, when I'm campaigning, I don't get everybody turning around to me, Finbar, your members in the GMB, not all of them, are going to be saying, I'll tell you what, Labour's the answer to our problems. They're not going to be turning around and saying 100% of GMB members and 100% of Unite members, Unison, USDOR, the trade union movement, are not all going to vote Labour because, you know, there's campaigning work to be done there. And it's tough. I mean, the campaigning is against the onslaught of a media which we've always found difficult. I mean, you think, well, what are the government doing at the moment as we come out of the pandemic? And I've said this before, and I will continue to say this. I tell you what the government's strategy is. This is year zero. They are resetting the debate. The 10 years of austerity have not happened. This is the pandemic and the government coming out of that pandemic. And the local elections have to be seen within that framework. The government are talking about additional public spending. They're not talking about any of the austerity. They're talking about how they are solving the problems of the pandemic. And so when we talk about rebuilding, we need, and we'll have to campaign to expose where we are and some of the issues when the smoke clears and as it clears, exposing them for where they are. As Chantal says on local government, hasn't happened by accident. Hasn't happened by accident. Social care is a disgrace, not happened by accident. What Paul's facing at British Gas, not happened by accident. You know, these people are having to fight for it. The race report that we've seen, fighting that will have to be fought, and the fight for that again will be out there. Food banks at record levels, not happened by accident. That's government policy to push people to food banks. Not happened by accident. School meals, the free school meals. How was that got? Campaigning. That's not happened by accident, that people were going to, pupils and students were going to be denied that. People depending on benefits, universal credit, all of those things not happened by accident. Those things are a consequence locally of national Tory decisions. And each and every one of us listening to this, campaigning for this, has to recognise that national policies have local consequences, and we have to campaign for them, point them out to people, and show that the Labour Party has an alternative to it. And we've started to lay that out. But there's a battle, and we have to recognise that battle. And I tell you, something that struck me with Terry, and something actually I think Nicole said, but others will have faced as well. When we make this argument, it is going to be hard, because not everybody, as Terry went out, I think you were saying, Terry, sometimes when you first stood for the council, knocked on doors, people said to you, you're that, and I'm sure you were being polite, Terry, and they put it more succinctly than this, aren't you the guy in the Shrewsbury picket? And they won't have said it in a complimentary way, but you'll have stood up for what you believed and campaigned for it. And that is the same with the Labour and trade union movement. These things have to be campaigned for, won, fought for, demanded. They're not just given. And sometimes that's difficult. But I know this, there are people standing in these local elections, every single Labour candidate, as a supporter of the trade unions, whether it be the GMB or Unite or wherever it be, they are seeking to do their best for ordinary people, but that battle has to be won, because others will seek to undermine that message. But we can't let, I'll just finish with this, Finbar, because there's an awful lot, we can't let the Tories reset the agenda as this is year zero. This is year zero. We've had numerous people know the consequences of it, and we mustn't let what happened. Let me give this historical analogy. 2008, 2009, the financial crash. I say this, Gordon Brown and the Labour government saved the country and helped the rest of the world stave off what would have been a depression and cause, and you know, it was a massive financial crash. But they saved the world with others, not just on their own, with others, saved it from a depression. Who paid the price? Who paid the price for that financial crash brought about by speculation in America initially? I'll tell you who paid the price. In 2010, when the Tories won the election, ordinary people paid the price for the financial collapse. Ordinary people who had nothing to do with causing that financial crash paid the price. When we rebuild out of the pandemic, there's billions of pounds that have quite rightly been spent to protect families and protect business. Can't argue with that. But I tell you what, the poorest people in society, those in need, ordinary working people, should only pay their fair share and not be expected to pay the full burden of repaying and sorting the loans out as they will when those bills come in. I think Keir Starmer, the most important thing he said, and I think Paul used this phrase, who are the key workers now? I'll tell you what the pandemic showed, if it showed nothing else. Some of the poorest people, including your members, Finbar, at GMB, the delivery drivers, the shop workers, the cleaners, the ordinary people who by and large often get no recognition, were those people all the way through the pandemic, often without PPE, often without knowing the full risks that they were facing, often on the poorest wages, often having to work the longest hours. They were the people on the front line in the battle against that pandemic, along with the brilliant NHS. And if the Labour Party and the Labour movement stands for anything, it's when we rebuild, as Nicole's rather said, when we rebuild coming out of this, the Labour Party and the trade union movement should have, right at the heart of what it demands, is that when we talk about rebuilding better, we are talking about rebuilding fairer, tackling inequality, tackling discrimination, and ensuring that when we talk about the key workers, we don't mean the elite at the top in their boardrooms, earning squillions of pounds, as we saw from somebody who earned 400 million in a year just yesterday or the day before. We mean decent, ordinary people in the way that Paul and Terry have just talked to us about. Ordinary people being assured of a decent future for themselves and their families, and the rebuilding of a community based on fairness, social justice, and greater equality. And if that doesn't inspire us all, then we will have to keep fighting for that. But look, the campaign can be won, will be won. It's going to be a struggle and it's going to be a battle. But Terry, let's hope that it doesn't take us 47 years to see a Labour government, but a government in power nationally and people in power locally that can pursue those. I just finished with this, Finbar. Sorry, and I sort of finished. That slogan of who are the key workers now? Let's rebuild, but rebuild in a fairer way. The Tories will say it. They will. But we've got to show that it's the Labour movement that means it, has the policies, desire, compassion, and ability to actually deliver it. And we have to persuade ordinary people and our members and your members that we hold the key to that better future. And that's the fight for us as we go forward. It's a fight that's worth fighting and a fight that's worth winning. Thanks for your time, everyone, and good luck.
Thanks, Vernon, and thanks to everybody. I'm sure everybody watching on Zoom and on social media has been inspired by what they've heard tonight about the solidarity of trade unionists clubbing together in situations where we can improve conditions for our members and for our communities, which is exactly what these local elections are. And it would be remiss of us to do anything but throw our full weight behind trade union candidates at these elections. So just to remind everybody of those 3 asks from the beginning of the meeting, if you take these back to your branches, back to your workplaces, back to your families and your communities, to sign up for a postal vote, to get your family and friends and colleagues to sign up for a postal vote, to join us for a trade union phone bank, and that'll be on our social media, but it's in the chat box as well. But also to get people into the union, build our GMB union, because it's only by working together that we can deliver all of the things we've spoken about tonight. So on that note, I'll thank everybody again and wish everybody a very happy Easter weekend. So thanks very much, everybody.